Chapter 12. The State as a Protector of Property. In the final architecture of our critique, we reach the ultimate guardian of the great theft, the state. According to the classical analysis of Friedrich Engels and the legal observations of Emile de Laveleye, the state is not a natural byproduct of human evolution, nor is it a benevolent social contract entered into by free men for the common good. Instead, the state is a power that was born of society but placed itself above it, emerging at the precise historical moment when the communal bonds of the old world were shattered by the introduction of private property. In the ancient pre-property world, the world of the nomadic tribe or the communal village, there was no need for a state in the modern sense. There were no deep, irreconcilable class antagonisms to manage. Decisions were made through consensus, leadership was earned through wisdom or bravery, and law was simply the shared tradition of the tribe. Because the land was common, there were no owners and no trespassers. There was no one to guard, and therefore no need for a guard. However, once the earth was partitioned, once a small group of individuals claimed the forests, the mines, and the fields as their exclusive domain, the social atmosphere underwent a violent chemical change. Society split into two camps, those who held the titles and those who held only their hands. This division created a state of perpetual subterranean warfare. The have-nots, driven by the memory of the commons, naturally sought to reclaim the means of their survival. To prevent this reclamation, the owners required a power that was stronger than any individual, a force that could claim a monopoly on violence and clothe that violence in the mantle of justice. Thus, the state emerged as the armed guard of the fence. It is a machine designed to stand above the chaos, creating a facade of neutrality, while every heartbeat is dedicated to the preservation of the status quo. It provides the judges to validate the ancient parchment titles, the surveyors to draw the borders, and the soldiers to punish those who steal back from the privatized earth. By standing above society, the state creates the illusion that it represents the people or the nation, when in reality its primary function is to ensure that the initial theft of the world, the separation of the producer from the means of production, remains a permanent, legal, and unchallengeable reality. The state, therefore, is the ultimate institutionalized form of the property system. It is the third party that steps in to settle the conflict between the master and the servant, always ensuring that the master's title remains intact. Without the state, the fence would fall within a day. With the state, the fence becomes a sacred boundary. This explores the state not as a provider of services, but as the supreme insurance policy of the wealthy, a monumental apparatus built to freeze history in place and protect the right of the first occupant against the right of the living. 2. The division of citizens rather than kinship by territory. One of the most profound, calculated, and irreversible shifts in the evolution of human governance was the systematic destruction of the gens, the kinship group, and its replacement with territorial division. To understand the magnitude of this change, you must realize that for the vast majority of human existence, your identity was defined by who you were, your bloodline, your ancestors, your living human network. You belonged to a group of people, not to a piece of dirt. However, as the state emerged to solidify the great theft of private property, it found these ancient organic kinship ties to be a dangerous obstacle to its authority. The state's primary problem was that the old tribal loyalties were communal. If a member of a clan was threatened, or if their common land was seized, the entire bloodline rose as one to defend them. To govern a society now divided by extreme wealth and poverty, the state had to shatter these natural horizontal bonds and replace them with a rigid vertical loyalty to a geographic district. This was the birth of the citizen as a cold administrative unit. People were no longer grouped by their mothers and fathers, but by the specific box they occupied on a surveyor's map. This shift from person right to land right allowed the state to categorize and manage humanity with the clinical efficiency of a warehouse manager. By pinning individuals to a specific territory, the state achieved two vital goals for the protection of property. First, the atomization of resistance. By breaking the clans and forcing people to identify with a ward, county, or district, the state destroyed the deep ancestral solidarity that might have resisted the enclosure of the commons. You were no longer part of a powerful landowning family tree. You were an isolated individual residing in District 4. Second, the geometry of extraction. Territorial division turned the earth into a grid for taxation and conscription. The state could now survey a piece of land, calculate its productive value, and demand a tribute, tax, from whoever sat upon it, regardless of their family history or social standing. The map became more real than the person. In this new world, your rights were no longer inherent to your being. They were attached to your residence. If you moved across an invisible line drawn by a bureaucrat, your legal status could change instantly. This transformation ensured that the state could protect the property of the wealthy by treating the entire population as a collection of interchangeable taxpayers tied to specific coordinates. The ancient warm bonds of kinship were sacrificed on the altar of the territorial state, turning the world into a vast subdivided estate where every human being was a tenant of the government, and every fence was a line of command. 3. The state machine designed for exploitation. Once citizens were pinned to a territory and stripped of their tribal shields, the state could fully develop into a sophisticated machine for exploitation. Critics like Engels and the more radical followers of Laveleye argued that the state is not merely a neutral referee in economic disputes. It is a mechanical apparatus specifically engineered to facilitate the transfer of value from the producer to the owner. It is the legal engine that keeps the wheels of accumulation turning, ensuring that the surplus of human labor is funneled upward. Every gear of this machine is greased by the protection of property. The legal system is meticulously designed to prioritize contract rights over human needs. In the eyes of the machine state, the sanctity of a signature on a parchment is more important than the growl of a hungry stomach. If a man takes a loaf of bread from a sprawling warehouse, the state doesn't weigh the man's survival against the baker's surplus. It simply sees a violation of a title deed. The machine treats the right to live as a private commodity that must be purchased, rather than a natural fact of existence. The police and the military serve as the physical pistons of this exploitation machine. Their primary function is not to protect and serve the individual, but to enforce the peace of the market. This peace is often the silence of the dispossessed, maintained through the threat of violence. When workers strike for a larger share of the product, or when peasants resist the enclosure of a common forest, the state machine deploys its armed forces to restore order, and order that is synonymous with the uninterrupted flow of profit to the proprietors. Furthermore, the state machine creates its own class of administrators, the bureaucracy, who have a vested interest in the machine's survival. These officials are paid from the taxes extracted from the very people they govern, creating a parasitic layer of society that depends on the continued existence of private property. In this sense, the state doesn't just protect the wealthy. It is itself a massive economic project that thrives on the division of society. It is the executive committee of the propertied class, ensuring that the great theft remains efficient, orderly, and above all, legally unassailable. 4. The alliance between government and wealth, the stock exchange. In the advanced stages of the property-based civilization, the mask of the state slips entirely, to reveal a total symbiotic alliance between government and wealth. In the 19th and 20th centuries, this relationship evolved beyond the local landlord's fence. It was solidified through the rise of the stock exchange, the central bank, the mechanism of public debt. The state no longer merely protects the local aristocrats' crops. It has become the ultimate insurer of the global financier's ledger. This alliance is a marriage of convenience, where the government provides the military force, the legal stability, and the infrastructure needed for markets to thrive, while the wealthy provide the capital and credit that the government requires to function. This is most visible in the phenomenon of national debt. When a state takes out massive loans from private banking syndicates, often to fund wars or colonial expansion, it effectively mortgages the future labor of its citizens. Every child born into the modern state is born with a debt already attached to their name, a chain that binds their future sweat to the interest payments of the creditor class. This creates a situation where the sovereignty of the people is an empty shell, perpetually subordinate to the confidence of the markets. If a democratically elected government attempts to enact radical social reforms, redistribute land, or tax the wealthy too heavily, the stock exchange reacts with a panic. Capital flees, the currency devalues, and the state is threatened with immediate bankruptcy. In this way, the financier holds a veto power over democracy more potent than any monarch's scepter. The state, fearing a loss of credit, will almost always betray the needs of the poor to satisfy the demands of the bondholders. The halls of Parliament and the floors of the stock exchange have become two sides of the same coin. The state acts as a collection agency for the wealthy, using its tax system to vacuum up small amounts of wealth from the masses to pay interest to the few. This explores how public policy has been transformed into market management, where the primary duty of the statesman is not to ensure the welfare of the people, but to maintain the credit rating of the nation. The state is no longer the representative of the community. It is the executive committee of the creditors, ensuring that the great theft continues to pay dividends to the ghost owners of the world. 5. The eventual fall of the state and classes. We reach the summit of our critique with the most radical and profound prophecy of 19th century social thought, the inevitable fall of the state and the abolition of classes. This is the terminal point of the logic we have traced from the first fence. The argument, championed by thinkers from Proudhon to Engels and Laveleye, is as elegant as it is devastating. If the state is a historical organ created solely to manage the violent friction between those who have and those who do not, then a society that restores communal or mutual possession will find the state to be a useless appendage, a relic of a darker age that must, by necessity, wither away. The state is not presented here as the final achievement of human reason, but as a social fever, a biological response to the disease of inequality. In the communal past, the tribe functioned without a centralized machine of force, because there were no deep, irreconcilable antagonisms. But once the great theft occurred, the state became the armed guard of the fence. It follows, then, that as the great theft is undone, as land returns to those who work it, and the instruments of production are no longer monopolized by an idle few, the raison d'etre for the standing army, the secret police, the high courts, and the iron prisons simply vanishes. This falling away is described not as a descent into chaotic lawlessness, but as an ascent into self-administration. The critics envisioned a transition from the government of persons, where one man dictates the life of another through the threat of the gallows, to the administration of things. In this future, the centralized power of the state is replaced by a horizontal network of communal organizations that coordinate resources, manage production, and ensure the equitable distribution of nature's fruits. It is the shift from a society of command and obedience to a society of coordination and consensus. This final section reflects on the ultimate hope that sustained the radicals of the 1800s, the belief that humanity would eventually outgrow the need for a master. They argued that the state is like a pair of crutches used by a society that has been crippled by property relations. Once society heals and learns to walk on the solid ground of the commons again, the crutches can be cast aside. The death of the state is, in this view, the true birth of human history. It marks the moment when property is no longer a wall that divides brother from brother, but a shared foundation upon which we build a common destiny. The story of the great theft ends where the story of freedom begins. In a world where the earth belongs to no one, and its bounty belongs to all who labor upon it.